Hello ladies and gentlemen, today you guys are going to be learning about intervals, specifically whole and half steps. I'm actually going to read along with you on part of this article here. This is the article that you can find on our band website. I also have a piano at the top where I'm going to show you some examples as we go through the article. So starting down here. An interval is the distance between two notes. In this lesson we will only learn about half and whole step intervals. Since we haven't learned key signatures yet, we will relate them to the key of C majors, which has no sharps or flats. The C major scale starts from C and ends at C. You can see the C major scale here, starting on C and ending on C. This is a major scale in the key of C major. We'll discuss the difference between major and minor scales, as well as other scales and even modes at a later time. For now, we are only considering major scales. Imagine a piano. The distance from B to C is a half step because no other notes fall between them. They show you that right here. So from B to C is just one key in one direction, which means it's a half step. So if you look at my piano up here, from B to C is the key right next door. That means that it's going to be a half step. If we wanted to look at the distance between A and B, that would actually be a whole step because it has two half steps together. So two half steps is the same as one whole step. So to show you that up here, to go from A to B, we have to traverse a few different keys to get there. So again, you see that there are three dots, which shows that it's a whole step. So this to this is a half step, this to this is another half step. So half step plus a half step equals a whole step. Just like in math, half plus a half equals 1. So this is a whole step. Again, to show from before, if we were just going from B to C, we're going to the key right next door, which means that's just a half step. So going through this, if you see two dots like this, it's only a half step. And again, if you see three dots like this, it means that it's a whole step. Okay, moving on. Naturally occurring half steps. Each note is a certain distance apart from the next, and they form a pattern that repeats. All major scales follow this exact pattern. This is the pattern they're showing you here. The W stands for whole step. The H's stand for half step. So all major scales have the pattern of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. The distance between the first two notes, so in this case from C to D, in a major scale is a whole step. So if we went up to our piano and tried to do C to D, we would get C, another key in between, and then D. So we have three dots. This means it's a whole step. That's what it shows us between C and D is a whole step. The distance between the second and third notes is also a whole step. So now if we start on D and try to go to E, we still have to pass through another key to get there. So we have three dots again, whole step. So that's here D to E, shows up here D to D sharp or E flat, and then up to E. Alright, moving from the third note of the scale to the fourth note of a scale, we actually just get a half step. So this is E and this is F. I'll show you up here. This is E, this is F. There's no key in between them here, so it's just a half step. Those two little dots is just a half step. Next you'll see over here we have another whole step, so that would be represented by three dots, three keys. Same thing here for this whole step and this whole step. And then at the very end of the scale again we get another half step. So the end of our scale here is from B to C. So if we went from B to C, you'll notice that there's no key in between, so 2 dots is just a half step. The reason why we're learning this is so that you can actually build a major scale starting on any note that you want to. So, for example, if I wanted to build a scale starting on a D instead, so say I want a D to be my very first note, I could follow this exact same pattern and end up building myself a scale that sounds like a correct major scale. So you guys can look at this diagram a little bit more on your own if you want. It's just trying to show you the distance between one note to the next in the actual scale. So going from, never mind, just going to keep going. Alright, so things get a little more tricky when we start to add our sharp signs and our flat signs. The reason why this gets more complicated is because instead of just looking at our C major scale like we were looking at all the way up here, see, everything in here was natural, there are no sharps and no flats. It's a little easier to see. When we go back down and we get into our stuff with accidentals in it, it's going to impact the way our brain thinks about it. So, in case you have forgotten, if you see a sharp sign, they do look like hashtags, but we call them sharp signs in music. Sharp signs will make a note sound higher. The opposite of a sharp sign is a flat sign. So like here we see a flat sign. It almost looks like a little B, but it's called a flat sign. That's going to make the note sound lower. So these are signs that impact the notes and don't let them be natural anymore. So if we look at the interval between E and F, so looking up here on my piano, I have E here and I have F here. Think to yourself, is this a half step or a whole step? Hopefully, because you've seen the 2 dots and you've realized that there's no key in between these two, it is only a half step. That's what it's showing you right here. So the distance from E to F is just a half step. Over here, they've done a second example where we go from E to F sharp. So before we had E to F, now we're going from E to F sharp, which is up here. So you'll notice, hey, look, we have 3 dots going from E here to F sharp here. There's a key in the middle of those. This means that it's a whole step away. So E is a whole step away from F sharp. We're going to look at a different set of intervals, so I'm going to take these dots off. We're going to look at the interval between B and C. So B and C, we've seen them here as well as other places on this piano. We have B here, we have C here. There are only 2 dots being represented. There's no key in the middle, so this is a half step. Shows you here B to C is just a half step. If we wanted to instead make it a whole step, we could lower our B to a B flat. So our B flat's here. So to get from a B flat to a C or a C to a B flat, we have to move a whole step. There are 3 dots. There's a key in between. So this is a whole step. So when we add flat signs and sharp signs, we basically end up increasing or decreasing the interval. So we either make it bigger or we make it smaller. We'll look at another example here. Let me take these dots away. So here they're talking about the interval or the space between G and A. G is here, A is here. You'll notice that there is a key in between right up here, which is called G sharp, or can also be referred to as A flat. It's the same thing. We have 3 dots. We have this lovely key in between, so it means that this is a whole step. A whole step is just made up of 2 half steps. So if I start on this key and go to the neighboring key, that's a half step. If I start on this key and go to the neighboring key, that's another half step. So remember, half step plus half step equals a whole step. Some of you may be feeling a little bit confused about why some of the black keys have different names at different times. So we have what are called enharmonic tones. An enharmonic note is one that has basically 2 names. So I'm going to start with this note right here, which is B flat. B flat's a very common note to play in band. It's called a B flat because this key right here is B, regular plain old B, and if we make it flatter, we've made it a half step lower. So that's called B flat. But we can also think of it backwards. So for example, this key right here is A, just regular plain old A. So if we take A and we want to raise it just a half step, that's A sharp. You'll notice that A sharp and B flat land me on the same exact key on the piano. And if I play this key on the piano, whether I call it an A sharp or a B flat, it's going to sound exactly the same. So an A sharp and a B flat are enharmonic tones. It just means that there's two names for one key. Pretty simple. So there are a lot more examples on the page that you guys can check out. Again, this page is on our band website under the Upper School Band tab. It's the one that tells you to read it. It shows you examples like going from A to B. It shows you where they are on the piano. What I want you guys to do is take a few minutes and go ahead and go to the band site. You're going to do the pop-up piano yourself so that you can manipulate it, you can play with it. I want you to practice, first of all, by clicking not the play button, but the mark button. If you click the mark button, you can do what I've been doing with these little red dots. So all I want you to do is find an interval that's a whole step. Again, a whole step is going to require 3 dots of exactly neighboring notes. So another example would be 1, 2, 3. You have to use ones that are all right next to each other. So practice just looking at the intervals that are whole steps with 3 dots. Then you can practice half-step intervals, which just require 2 dots directly next to each other. They can start anywhere. So I could do this one here. As long as they are directly next to each other, the keys must be touching. So it could be anywhere on this keyboard. I would also like for you guys, after you're done kind of playing with marking them, go ahead and hit the play button. When you hit the play button, you'll be able to hear what they sound like. So for example, a half step, it actually sounds like Jaws. If you're at all familiar with those shark movies where they're like, da-dum, da-da-dum, it sounds like sharks coming to get you. So that's how I remember what half steps sound like. They sound like Jaws coming to attack you. And again, it can be any note you want, as long as it starts on 1 and then goes directly to the neighboring key. So that key has to be touching that one. You can also experiment with playing some whole steps. So again, that's 1 note and then 2 half steps away. So make sure that you are wearing your headphones as you guys go into this step so that we're not making our neighbors listen to our music. Thank you guys so much, and I'll get back with you in just a few minutes. Go play on that pop-up piano.